Good evening all, and welcome. Over the 7 years I've had this channel, I've been asked on various occasions, what's my personal ghost story? And tonight, I am going to share with you just that. The first story is my personal encounter that happened to my wife and I many years ago now. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This experience took place in France at the end of 2013. I was visiting my then fiancée, now wife, as she was studying abroad. We had just come back on the bus from the centre of Bordeaux. It must have been around 10 at night. It was dark, and it was spitting ever so lightly, almost falling like snow. The rain was that light. That combined with the minimal street lighting gave for a very eerie setting. I need to describe the road to you. My wife lived in a house at the very end of a long road as part of a residential neighborhood. We had to walk something like a kilometer with only 3 street lights on this 1 kilometer stretch of road to reach her house. We were walking, and it was eerily quiet. With the rain gently coming down and huge patches of darkness in between the streetlights, we were slowly making our way across the dark houses. When out of nowhere, right as we were getting to the passage of her house, we hear a laugh. Not any laugh, a deep, guttural, demonic laugh emerge from nowhere. The type you might hear in a creepy kids movie. It was so abrupt and loud and came out of nothing but silence that we both jumped out of our skin, held hands tighter, and ran as fast as we could back to her house. Only when we were safely inside did we even contemplate the idea of going back to see what was there. You see, the house where the noise came from, well, the garden I should say, was actually completely abandoned as far as we were aware. We had never seen anyone as we walked the route often, in or out of the house, no cars in the driveway, and we paid special attention after this event to see if we ever saw anyone there, but we never did. We often wonder if it was something truly paranormal, maybe a demon laughing at our foolishness for walking home late at night in the dark, or perhaps someone who wanted to play a prank, though they must have been waiting a while to perform it. In any case, I'll never know for sure the truth behind the event, but to me, it remains one of the creepiest things that's ever happened in my lifetime. I have a lot of ghost stories to share, but this one is just something I still think about a lot, even as an adult. I grew up in a ranch in Mexico. My family owned fields upon fields of corn, wheat, and avocado. I used to play in the cornfield because that was behind my nana's house. It was like a maze, which I loved to run around in. Well, one evening, I trailed off too deep, and I got lost. I was 7 years old when this happened. As it got darker, I began to cry and roam aimlessly until I was grabbed by my arm. I screamed, but quickly realized that it was my nana's neighbor, Petra, also her BFF. In Spanish, she was my nana's comadre. A direct translation of the word is godmother. She baptized 3 of the 13 kids my nana had. In my family, a comadre or compadre is a nickname used as a term of endearment for the godparents of the kids they baptized. Well, my nana's comadre, Petra, found me and said, "Mija, why are you out so late? You know stuff creeps at night." I told her I was lost, and she reprimanded me gently, but then told me that I was far away from my nana's house, and because it was cold, it would be best to go to her house. I held her hand, and she led me to her house. She asked if I was hungry, and I told her I was. She told me she had just made flour tortillas and had beans cooking, and that it should be finished soon. I was happy because my favorite dish is tortillas and beans, We got to her house, and it was nice and warm. She sat me on her table and served me a huge bowl of beans, and then cut me some fresh cheese. She made me some mini burritos which I happily ate, and then told me she was going to call my nana, that I was at her house. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. I felt fine, ate, and was extremely full. Then after, my nana's comadre came back from calling my nana. She sat across from me and smiled. She was a small woman, with very pretty hazel eyes, and said, "Mija, I couldn't get a hold of my comadre or compadre. They must be looking for you, so finish up and wash up." I nodded. "Also, you need to tell my comadre that I'm very sorry to have left without saying goodbye," she said as well. "You're leaving, Nana Petra?" I asked, feeling really sad. "Yeah, but don't worry. I'll come back when the time's right." And she smiled at me. I was really sad. "When are you leaving?" "When I drop you off, I'll leave with my daughter," she told me. I was sad, but I agreed to tell my nana. Now that I'd finished eating, I washed my hands at her water pillar, and she led me back through the cornfield. She led me to the middle and kissed my hair and said, "Keep walking in a straight line. You'll hear your tata calling out for you. And remember to tell your nana what I said." I told her I would, and began to walk in a straight line like how she'd pointed, and I could hear my tata in the distance. I called back and we found one another in no time. He was upset. He thought a coyote found me and hurt me, and he reprimanded me until we got to the house where my nana was sitting on the dining room table. I ran up to her, and she asked me where I'd been. I told her that I'd been to Nana Petra's house, and she went pale. She asked me to clarify that, and I told her that Nana Petra found me, fed me, and brought me to the field when she hadn't been able to reach them on the phone. I told her that she wanted to say goodbye, but that she had to leave with her daughter. At that very moment, my nana began to cry, and I was scared because she was very distraught. My tata told me to stop lying because my nana was crying, and then I began to cry too. I swore it was all true. I told them what I saw, and what I ate in detail. My tata told me that it was impossible, because Nana Petra had died that very morning. They also mentioned that Nana Petra didn't have any daughters, only sons. My tata then called my uncle over, and they drove to Nana Petra's house, and I was never told anything after what they had found. Until I got older, my uncle told me that when they went to the house, they found the door open. The stove was hot, but the water pillar was empty, and the daughter mentioned, we came to find out, that my Nana Petra, in her early 20s, miscarried a baby girl, and she mourned her for a very long time. My uncle was spooked out, but they always say that my Nana Petra came to say goodbye to my nana, but because I got lost, I sidetracked her. But nonetheless, it was spooky that she fed me, and I physically felt my Nana Petra. So I still have a hard time grasping the fact that it had been her spirit, and not her physical self. This happened last June, and back in those days I was a motorcyclist. I bought my bike after I graduated and used to ride it every chance I got. I didn't even have a direction in mind, I just loved riding. I was riding one evening and I knew that I had a day off the following day, so I felt like going kind of far. I had a good night out riding, and I decided to head home sometime after midnight. I was on my way back towards Setagaya in Tokyo. The roads were not so busy. I was taking it easy, and then all of a sudden the car in front of me stopped. It stopped at such a speed that it collided with the guardrail. I was shocked to see the accident happen right before my eyes. I had no other choice but to pull over and try and figure out what happened. I raced over to the driver's side window and saw the driver was female. She was visibly distressed. She couldn't stop shaking her head, and her hands were firmly clasped on the steering wheel. Oh, this is bad, I thought to myself. I started off by asking if she was all right, in as gentle a tone as I could muster. I waited a few seconds, but she didn't reply to my question, and I began to panic. This was serious. I realized that I should call the police, so I did. While waiting for them, I asked several times if the woman was all right, and eventually she got out the car. She didn't look hurt, but her skin had gone very pale, almost to the point it looked blue, and was muttering something. I couldn't make out what she was saying, so I leaned my ear close to her mouth, and she kept murmuring, "What have I done?" I could hear the tremble in her voice, and then, as if in an answer to her own question, she said something. "I ran over a child." She kept repeating those words, her voice gathered strength and volume, and it was very hard to listen to her panicked wails. I was deeply disturbed. It was a frightening situation. Then I remembered that I was behind her and didn't see a child in the road. I was certain there was no one around, plus it was the dead of night. I looked back and didn't see any child anywhere. I sat with the woman and tried to calm her down for a while, but occasionally I stood up and went in search of the child she thought she'd hit with the car. There were no children in the area. A few moments later, the police arrived. I spoke with one of the two officers and he searched with me for this child. The officer asked me what happened repeatedly, and I repeatedly told him that all I saw was the lady in front swerve and hit the guardrail. I said that I didn't see anyone on the road. The officer went and asked the woman about what happened, and I went with him to listen. According to the woman, she saw a young child dart out into the road ahead of her, and she heard and felt the collision. But no matter what we did, no matter where we searched, we couldn't find the child. The officer started backing towards his patrol car while talking into his radio, and the woman was looking around the road absent-mindedly, as I watched her eyes fall on the roadside mirror. You know those mirrors you sometimes see in rural areas that allow you to see oncoming traffic around the bend? They're circular, and they're usually on a high pole, tall enough for the driver to see and not be distracted by. I think they're sometimes known as convex mirrors. Well, that's what she looked at the moment she laid eyes on it, and a terrible scream rose from the pit of her stomach. The officer was shocked, as was I, and we rushed over to her and noticed that she was looking at the roadside mirror. I came over to look as well. We looked into the mirror and saw a child in the road. There was no one there when we looked without the help of the mirror, but when we looked into the mirror, it was there. It was strange, the strangest thing I've ever seen, and I couldn't believe my eyes. The child appeared to be about 4 or 5, wearing a kindergarten uniform. She looked like a kid that went to a good school. That child stared at us with an utterly expressionless look on her face. The police officer and I turned to look at the road almost simultaneously, and there was no child in the road. We looked back at the mirror, and we could only see ourselves and the female driver sat on the side of the road. Our faces looked incredibly pale, and our mouths hung open in shock. The woman then exploded into a full-blown state of panic, and the ambulance that was intended for the child took the woman away instead. But before she went, she asked for my contact information, saying she might have to call me and ask me about what happened again, and the officer said that for her sake, it wouldn't be a good idea, and it would be better to forget about the incident entirely. His face was as white as snow. I insisted that the officer should take my information, but there was to be no further contact from anyone I met that day. It has all left me very confused and troubled. I think about it often. What really happened that day is a mystery to me, but I believe that I had a run-in with the paranormal, and that little girl's spirit still remains in the spot where she met her final moments. This happened a few years ago when I was working late at the lab. I was studying engineering back then, and I was writing my graduation thesis. I had so much to do, I was pretty much in the lab every night working long into the early hours of the morning. My thesis deadline was approaching, and I was racing the finish line, to be honest. I was writing my thesis between experiments. I honestly shouldn't have been wasting time earlier in the year. I finally wrote the outline for the thesis the day before the deadline, which only left a final confirmation experiment for me to do. The good thing was that in a sense time was on my side. Each experiment took a long time to conduct, a few hours before each reaction, so I could write my thesis while waiting. And because I had left it so late, it meant I would be pulling an all-nighter in the lab again. It appeared that I was the only one who had left it so last minute, so I was alone in the lab and the only person in the whole building. As you might expect, it was pretty lonely there. I turned on the lights to make it seem less lonely, and I even turned on the lights to the corridor, just as a warning to anyone. What I did was dumb. Conducting experiments alone at night with no support is very dumb and dangerous, and I certainly should not have done that. I think the following happened around 3 a.m. At this point, my experiment was finally reaching its conclusion. I was making my checks. I didn't want any mistakes to undo all this good work, and I didn't have time to do it over. I was simultaneously checking my arguments in the thesis too. Pleased there wasn't any glaring errors, and just a few minor things to correct. I could now see the finish line. I looked up from my work and saw a stranger standing at the entrance of the lab staring at me. I thought I knew everyone who worked or studied in this department, but I didn't recognize him. It was strange to see someone this late, let alone someone I'd never met. Our eyes met, and I thought to myself, this is bad. Something about this situation was very off-putting. It was past 3 a.m., and a man was just staring at me while I was all alone in the lab. I looked away, and when I looked back, the man was gone. Before I knew it, I was waking up at around 6 a.m., completely disoriented and confused. I must have dozed off. Now it was 6 a.m. It was a bit bright in the lab. The morning light was spilling in from the windows, and I scrambled to finish my thesis. I was suffering from lack of sleep, and I was all over the place. I couldn't shake the thought that the strange man could have been watching me while I slept. He was a total stranger. I was determined to ask someone about him after I was finished writing. I remembered that he was wearing a blue vertical striped shirt. The more I thought about the guy, the creepier it got for me, since I was the last one in the lab, and I had the only key. We had to check out the key and sign a book to show who was last in the lab and who had the key. I couldn't think of a logical reason as to how he appeared. As an engineer, a problem without a solvable solution tends to agitate me. This is worse. This was unexplainable. By 8 a.m., another student arrived at the lab. I told him about the man that I'd seen, and he said he may have entered through some unlocked door elsewhere in the building. I wasn't very satisfied with that answer, so I spoke to a senior lab technician. He chuckled and offered a similar explanation, but I pushed back. That was when he said something quite strange. He said there was an incident in the building where a young man took his life and joked that perhaps I had seen a ghost. I brushed this off as nothing but superstition. You know, a ghost story? Personally, I thought better of someone who had spent their life devoted to the application of logic. But to entertain my own curiosity, I researched our lab's history and found that a part of the story was true. There was a broken-hearted lover who saw no sense in carrying on and ended his life right there in the lab. I read on and came to an interview with a former student who discovered his body. I don't want to disrespect the departed, but I feel it adds context to the story. According to the former student, he was wearing the shirt he took his girlfriend out for the first time in. I felt chills race up my spine when his friend described the shirt he was wearing on the fateful night. A blue, vertical striped shirt. Now that I've had time to reflect on the incident, I somehow don't feel scared. I second-guess what I saw often. I don't know if what I had seen was brought on by my tiredness, or if I really did experience something paranormal. But it all feels like a dream to me. Maybe I'd heard a rumor, and in my tiredness and stress, I created the image of the figure watching me. I find some comfort in believing this. However, it doesn't explain how I knew the color on his shirt. It remains, to me at least, an unsolved mystery. In 2002, when I was 19, I believe I had a close and personal encounter with a dark entity. My family lived in West Virginia, and up the hollow like most people in the state. Late one night, myself and 3 others decided to take a walk a bit further up the hollow, in a long, large loop. The idea was to walk along the roads which circle around the back of the family property. A short trip through the woods behind my great-uncle's house and then down the driveway to my house. In order to reach his property line, we had to leave the old dirt road and cross through a cow field. I was in the lead because I typically walk through these fields/woods when hunting and would walk this route in the dark with no problems. I felt that a bit of a backstory on my uncle is necessary. He was a Korean War infantryman. He was long divorced, bitter, and an alcoholic who didn't even socialize with his children or grandchildren. The man could literally drink a 30-pack of Milwaukee Best each and every day. There were times he would clear 2 30-packs. I know because I collected his cans every day for money. He was a bitter and hateful old man. It must be said that I regularly walked these woods, and before the night in question I had never experienced anything at all, or after, mainly because I never walked the route in the dark ever again. I would take the long walk home to avoid that patch of forest. It was a cloudy, moonless night, and as you guessed it, dark. No, we did not have flashlights. When I approached the fence, nothing. However, when I grabbed the barbed wire to cross, there was an entity, waiting on the other side. I did not see it. I saw darkness at first. It made itself known through a growl, guttural and low. It was head level to me, about 5'9". When it started to growl, it sounded between a bear and a deep rumble of a large dog. It was directly in front of me and I froze. My senses were going crazy trying to figure out what I was standing in front of. Its breath was hot and smelled of rotting flesh. Whatever it was in my face, daring me to cross. I must say too, with my eyes only, because I dared not move. I tried to find it. I saw the tree directly behind it, but not it. I knew that I was going to die, and at that moment I was terrified to the core. As abrupt as it made itself known, it was gone. It left without making a sound. I felt all the hairs stand on end and my heart honestly must have missed a beat. I felt the chill of the air. I felt like I could breathe again. So I turned to look at those that were with me. And my worst fear was realized. This was real. It actually happened. 2 of them were frozen in spot with horror-stricken faces and the 3rd was already running. Without another thought, I let go of the fence and ran past the 2. I ran to the closest dusk to dawnlight, climbed up an apple tree next to it and waited there until daylight. I did go back the next day with a rifle on my body to find nothing. No hair, no footprints, nothing. You could see where I was standing. I never figured out what it was for sure. That was until last year, when I discovered the accounts of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They explained the many different haunts of demons, how they operate, and that it's when it all clicked. I came face to face with a demon. I figured I should let you know that my uncle did survive the oppression. His youngest son had removed him from the house and put him in rehab. My uncle never talked to his son again. He lived another 15 years, got clean, saved, remarried, and passed away from natural causes. To my knowledge, once he was out of the house, he never went back and never collected his possessions from the house. To be honest, it was a shanty at best. Years after the incident, only one of the family ever lived in the house, and they only lasted a few weeks. According to my cousin, they packed up everything and moved out, and called and said they wouldn't be returning. Before you ask, the house fell in on itself a few years ago. This is my true account of the situation, and I never truly found out what it was. All I know is Ed and Lorraine Warren spelled out how demons work. I'm a Christian, and as such, I believe in physical demons. All I know is that Ed and Lorraine Warren spelled out how demons work, and I'm fairly confident that is what I encountered. My best friend passed away in 2014. I was in school at the time, so I was distraught and didn't know how I would carry on living. To this day, even being married with kids, I still feel like my life is just an epilogue, like my life was paused that day when I found out he died. Fair to say, I was gutted. Anyway, I got really into my PC gaming and would play Counter-Strike with my other friends that I met in college. And it's funny because thinking back on it, I never felt alone, even when it was just me, when my friends were busy all day. One night, I dreamt about him. He met me at the Spear Pillar, a location from a Pokemon game we both loved, and he hugged me, and it was as if it was his younger self had matured, while being 2 to 3 years on the other side. I felt a stubble against my cheek. It was surreal. Further on, he told me that I needed to stop worrying about him and that he was always there with me, be it on the bus, chilling at home, or at college. He said he was always there. Then he said something that quite frankly blew my mind. He mentioned how it's so nice of me to keep the spot at the end of the bed clear for him to sit down on, as it's his favorite spot every night. He loves to watch me play CSGO, especially with my mates. The conversation made me laugh. He said no matter where I am, he'll always find me and keep me company. It's crazy because subconsciously, I would always clear my bed, bearing in mind my room isn't always the tidiest, but as an adult I've gotten better. So I'm glad to have met him, and even when I'm away on deployment or putting my kids to bed, I still feel him around that it makes me happy and nostalgic. In 2017, I got a tattoo dedicated to him. It was my very first. I just miss my friend. In 2001, my grandpa, who I always referred to as Pop-Pop, was diagnosed with prostate cancer. I don't know the details, but I remember thinking it wasn't too bad because my family downplayed the whole thing constantly. I had never suffered a death in the family. I'd never even seen a dying person before, so I had no way to judge how Pop-Pop was actually doing. So I accepted my dad's insistence that his father was doing just fine. Eventually, the doctors told my family to take Pop-Pop home. My parents assured me it was because he was getting better. Obviously, my dad would be at my grandma and Pop's house every morning to help out however he could. And every morning, after he had done everything he could for them, he would return home and ask if my sister and I would want to go see them. We'd obviously say yes, so he'd hop back into the car and take us back out to their house. One day, I remember having a really strange dream. It was cowboys and Indians. I've never been interested in westerns at all, but my Pop-Up loved them. Suddenly, my Pop-Up appeared in my dream. Well, not in my dream, more like in front of it. He mouthed something inaudible, and I woke up. I looked at the clock. It was around 7:30. Way too early for a 13-year-old boy to be up, but the dream had shaken me, so I crawled out of bed. My sister was already up, which was equally strange, so I said my good mornings and grabbed some cereal. Around noon, my dad comes home, and as usual, he asks if we want to go see Grandma and Pop-Pop. By this point, he knows he doesn't need to ask, but habits are hard to break. We load up the car and head over, and here is where everyone feigns surprise out of politeness. Before my dad turns off the car, he tells us, "Guys, I have some news for you. Pop-Pop died this morning." I was stunned, for many reasons. Obviously, first, I thought he was getting better, and second, because I recalled my dream and realized what it was my Pop-Up was saying. He was mouthing goodbye. I later realized he died around 7:30 that morning, the same time he appeared in my dream. Furthermore, my dad would always bring our dog with him to my grandparents' house, a little Jack Russell called Lucky. Lucky would always hide under the hospital bed my Pop-Up was in. The day my Pop-Up died, Lucky skulked out from under the bed, and as he took his last breath, Lucky looked off to the far side of the room and let out a chilling howl. Not all that terribly fascinating, but I suppose the true stories rarely are. About 10 or so years ago, I had the house to myself as I was still living with my parents at the time, and I had a friend over. The night was going smoothly and normal. We're just playing co-op video games as teenage boys do, but eventually we both end up on our phones scrolling through Tumblr. My friend stumbles upon a 40 to 50 minute audio tape file of a private investigator talking to a high school campus about his experience during a murder investigation he's conducted. I believe it took place in Texas, but long story short, towards the end of this audio file, it leads up to the PI believing that the victim was exposed to a demon or evil entity that was the reason for the death of this person. He states it at the very end of the testimony of the case, that the demon feeds off your fear, and the more you think about it, the stronger its energy and presence gets. As far as we could both tell, it was a real testimony, and not a parody or creepypasta. So me and my friends hear the whole 40 or so minutes of testimony. We're just enthralled, almost hypnotized by it, and afterward try to go back to playing our game. Not 5 minutes later, the power in my room goes out. My room only. No big deal. I just go flip the breaker and turn it back on. 3 minutes later, boom, again. Flip the breaker again. A minute later, the same, and this continues with shorter time frames until the power in my room simply won't come back on. The first time it happens, we think it's a mere coincidence, but by this point, fear is really happening, and the thought of the entity is in our heads. At this point, it's around midnight to 1 a.m. My friend decides this isn't worth it for him, and he heads back to his place. Lol, thanks, leaving me by myself. The night goes on a little bit, and after my friend left, I spent the rest of the night in my living room with the lights on and crashed on the couch. I wake up with the TV still on, between 3 to 4 a.m. I don't know what possessed me to return to my room for sleep, but for some reason I convinced myself it was all in my head. I fall asleep incredibly fast, and my dream begins with me in my bed and room just as I was laid out in real life in the pitch darkness. This was extremely vivid, and an exact replica of my room. It was as lucid as could be, almost like being awake, but at one of the top corners of my room, where the wall meets the ceiling, I saw a pair of angry, dirty yellow eyes that were on a body blacker than black, hanging on my ceiling, just staring into my soul. I was fixated on the eyes, and they were fixated on me. I was just in shock and couldn't move, but the second I tried to move at all, the shadow figure zoomed to another corner of my ceiling and then launched at me. I woke up in a sweat just before I get contacted. The dream felt so real and vivid I woke up literally screaming, and there was a real sense of dread that took over my entire body in that moment and felt physically and mentally sick. Power still not working in the room, so I went to the living room once again and finished the night with all the lights on, not sleeping well at all. Nothing more ever came from that night, but as far as I can tell and find, the audio tape never existed. I've spent days upon days trying to find it multiple times all over the internet, and nothing even comes close up on the search results. By the way, the power to my room worked perfectly the following day after the sun rose, and has ever since. I swear, I don't know what happened. I've tried so many times to explain it rationally and to find the audio tape we'd listened to that night, and I haven't come close, neither has my friend, and we both remember it like it were yesterday. When I was in high school, I often used a shortcut when I was running late. It was a short path which went through a cemetery. One evening I felt a chill run down my spine while I was walking through there, and then it felt like someone whispered in my ear. It scared the hell out of me, so I ran for it. Later I managed to convince myself that it must have been my imagination, but that night I was proven wrong. Something had started. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a woman stand by my bed. The second I saw her, I was instantly paralyzed. I wasn't able to move anything except my eyes, so I kept my eyes on her. She was wearing modern-day clothes and had short hair, looming over me from the side of the bed, and was grinning. To see the whites of her eyes and her teeth lurching out of the darkness was utterly terrifying. I think at this point I lost consciousness because when I opened my eyes again it was morning. Well, if that would have been the end of my experience with the smiling apparition, then I could have counted myself lucky. But sadly there was more to come. The next night I woke up again and saw that woman. I tried to shut my eyes, but when I did that, she began whispering. I tried a different tactic. I repeatedly told myself that it was just a dream, but doing so didn't make it any easier. It just mentally exhausted me. This happened the next night, and the next. I think that I was noticeably different during that period because my parents, classmates, and teachers were all seemingly worried about me. I even saw looks of sympathy from strangers cast my way. I doubled down with my stubbornness and told myself that it was a dream and I had power over my dreams. Each day I would prepare myself for my nightly battle, but I kept the nightmare woman to myself. I just told anyone who asked me about it that I was having trouble sleeping. I think that I couldn't bring myself to admit what was happening. I stopped being stubborn, and around the 4th or 5th day I just didn't have much fight left in me. I was thinking of going to my parents with my problem, but that night a savior appeared at our home, my cousin. My cousin was going to be spending the night. He lived in a different town and was older. He wanted to go see some museum or exhibition or something in our area, so that's why he was spending the night with us. Despite him being older, he always had time for me and wanted to play games with me. I was far too tired to be any entertainment to him though, and that made me sad. He asked me what was going on and if I was okay. I told him my standard excuse that I hadn't been sleeping well. He said he had a fix for me. When it was time for bed, he'd punch me in the face to knock me out so I could finally sleep. He was of course kidding. It made me laugh and actually helped me relax a bit. I had started dreading the night since this began, and the sun began to go down each day, and I would slowly and surely become more and more anxious, but it was great to have him with me. To be honest with you, that night I slipped into sound sleep. It felt like the first decent sleep I had got in a while. But then right on schedule I found myself waking up at night time. This time it wasn't because I sensed the presence of the woman, it was a more natural reason. I needed to use the bathroom. I wanted to wake my cousin up because I was still worried about the woman, but I didn't want to hold it in any longer, so I had to get up. I left my bedroom and headed down the hall towards the light switch. It must have only been about 5 or 6 paces away. Then before I knew it, the woman was right next to me. My body froze in place, and then my neck turned against my will to face the woman. She wasn't smiling this time, it was worse. She looked furious. A range of emotion ran through my body. I went from outrage to fear. I thought that I could have died right there in the hallway. Just as I was considering that it might be the end for me, the lights came on, and I saw my cousin there. He must have awoken to use the bathroom too. I don't remember much of what happened next, but I did think he was concerned for me. The second the light came on, the woman disappeared. I think he didn't see her. When I got back into bed, I slept soundly for the first time in a long time, and I felt completely at ease when I woke up. My cousin woke up a little after me, and the first thing he said was, I had a nightmare. In his nightmare, he was being strangled by a short-haired woman who smiled the most twisted smile he had ever seen. He woke up to see a woman in the room peering over him, wide-eyed with her hands around his neck. He had basically seen and experienced what I had. He said at one point he was briefly freed from the binds of sleep paralysis, and at that point he asked her a question. If she was a family member or friend or someone who lived here. He then asked if she was a ghost, but he didn't get a reply. And because she wasn't saying anything and still strangling him, he hit her back. He said
He hit back as hard as he could. She was straddling him, and he kept hitting. He closed his eyes and he was running out of oxygen, and then suddenly he felt no pressure around his neck. He opened his eyes and the woman was gone. He then went to sleep, which for me is pretty shocking. I told him about my experiences and said that I believed the woman was a spirit that latched onto me during a walk through the graveyard. I don't know if that was a ghost, but something was strangling me for sure, and I definitely hit something, he replied. He believed it was a bad dream and nothing more. He thought he may have punched the wall or something, but my cousin had bruises on his neck the next morning. If they are unrelated, then that's one hell of a coincidence. Maybe it was all just a dream, but the fact that it happened to both of us had me doubting that. That was the last time I saw the smiling woman. By the way, I read online that if you ever have sleep paralysis, you can get out of it by trying to click your tongue repeatedly. Advice for next time.
Me and my male friends decided to go to Scotland for a camping trip with around 30 individuals, all guys. Considering we were travelling from Ireland to the Scottish Highlands in Lanark, this was a proper trip that no girl volunteered for. Too wet, too windy and all of that. So long story short, or as short as I can make it, we arrived and pitched our tents and set up for the first night. It took us longer than expected to get there, so we literally had to put our tents up in the dark while raining sideways. I noticed that my tent was missing a ground sheet, that square bit that goes under your tent. That was missing. I found it the next day. I yelled out, "Balls, I can't find my ground sheet." A close friend called Brian said to jump in the tent with him, which was already set up, which turned out to maybe be the best thing I've ever done, because I don't know if I could have experienced this on my own, and I'm so glad Brian was there to experience what happened with me. What I'm about to describe came straight out of the blue. We both laid side by side trying to sleep while hearing the howling wind and rain smashing into the tent. It was a proper mountain tent, so it was actually cozy. That's until I heard it. We both did. Everything went quiet. I mean everything. All the audio went mute. It was so strange. No wind, no rain, nothing. Then a little girl laughed loudly for about 30 seconds. It was so creepy, it's hard to describe. Clear as day, right outside our tent. She actually sounded around 6 or 7 because at the time I had a younger sister roughly the same age. I'm in my 30s now, and I was around 18 or 19 when this happened. It was a disturbing laugh. I mean right at the door, a thin layer between us and it. Although I couldn't see her, I have never felt so scared. The feeling and sensation I was getting was so bad. I've never felt that uncomfortable before, ever. My entire body turned to ice and locked up in fear. It was a joyous laugh mixed with playful and sinister all at once. When she stopped laughing, it wasn't a fade-away laugh, as if she was running away. It just stopped in mid-laugh completely. Immediately, both of us looked at each other, and I said, "Brian, did you just hear that?" "Yeah, a girl laughing," he replied. We did not think paranormal right away, and we both actually thought a girl was outside at 2 a.m. in the Highlands of Scotland lost, needing help. So we both panicked and bounced out, to see nothing but surrounded by rolling black hills. We got out of the tent in about 30 seconds and no one could have gotten down them highlands that quick. We both got this fear that stuck us together, and we jumped back into the tent. Don't know how long we lay there for dreading it would come back to laugh. To this day, Brian and I have never felt a fear like that before. We later discovered that those very hills were the hills where the innocent women and children were murdered during a Scottish civil war in the 1290s. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories, and if of course you did, you can let me know by liking, commenting, subscribing, and pressing the bell. All the regular good stuff. If you'd like to see more scary stories, you can click the links on screen now, and I'd like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names are on screen for their help and support. If you want to receive some fancy perks and stuff, follow the links to find out how. But until next time, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.